On today's episode of the show, I am joined by Steve Sumarah. Steve is the head coach at Carleton University as well with the junior national team. And I'll give him a chance to kind of introduce himself in a sec. Really excited. This is going to be the first of a number of videos we do with coaches from the national team and take a look at everything from our talk today on, being a head coach and really being a coach in general in the Canadian game and taking a little look at jet sweep to hopefully some positional stuff and some other detailed stuff with some other coaches as well. So thanks for coming on, Coach. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So do you want to give the people kind of a little background on how you got to be the head coach with the junior national team and the Carleton Ravens as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It's being part of a national team was always one of those moments where you were like, wow, wouldn't that be cool to be able to say that you can wear the maple leaf on your chest. And there's that element of pride and a little bit of that, excitement. You've seen over the last, say, 10, 12 years how well Team Canada has done. And to try to put yourself in that situation with some of the great coaches that have gone on prior to that, it was a good experience. It went through an interview process, and I guess they enjoyed the direction that we looked at going. And, we've done lots of different things in the last couple of years at Football Canada with the junior national team.
Yeah, it's certainly something, not very many people get that opportunity. And, I don't think people, grow up watching, whether it's hockey or, the Olympics, and you think of other sports when you think of, the national team, but some of the success that, the team's been able to have the last couple of years. And we got some film we're going to watch today from 2018. You guys were able to beat the United States. It's certainly a game that the world is, known for their version of football down there, which is great. And, I think it's something I've had a couple of athletes that I've coached, whether it be at Laurier or Cambridge Lions guys that have gotten the chance at different levels to play for that national team. And it's such a thing they carry with them, the pride. And a lot of those guys, they still use we had some guys that were, on younger national teams that still use that Team Canada football bag. Like, there's so much pride in that experience. And I think that's a cool thing for people to look for.
Well, it's interesting. I didn't realize it, but because we had a couple of guys from Carleton play on the national team, and those guys are so close. That whole 2018, they win the World Juniors, world champions, the whole bit, and how tight that group is. I mean, we basically were in Mexico City for about 15, 16 days, but it's almost like they were together for, 10, 15 years. They still stay in touch. And even as coaches, it was a pretty proud moment to be part of when they say that here's your gold medal and you're a world champion.
Yeah, it's certainly something special and not a lot of people get to be a part of. And we're excited to talk to both you and then a number of coaches in the coming weeks, from the national program and kind of help spread, their knowledge and understanding of the game to the people, trying to learn out there as well. So really there's kind of two parts of our conversation today. And the first one I'm especially excited for as a young coach myself, getting to talk to a guy who's a head coach, not just at the national level, but also at the youth sport level with Carleton. And I think there's a lot of people, and whether you're a high school coach or you're a young coach who's trying to work your way up in university, I think everyone wants to do well. They want to help their program. They want to be successful. When you're looking at a positional coach or even maybe a young coordinator, what are you looking for in those coaches that you think is going to help them, whether it's take the next step in their coaching career or become a head coach one day themselves, or just really help a program as a positional coach?
Well, I think the number one thing is communication. I'm a big believer that as a position coach, especially having been one, obviously myself throughout my career, that, understanding that you are that first line to the players. The players are going to, in turn, gravitate to you, and they need to have that trust. And those two words, trust and communication, became part of our guiding principles at Carleton because of that. And that's the first thing you're looking for. Can somebody communicate? How well they communicate? And it's a weird kind of a comment I'm going to make, but there's also patience. well, I find sometimes a lot of guys want to just, jump into 3 steps ahead. But, the most and probably the biggest learning curve for me was when I was a position coach, and you learned how people did things, and you asked questions, and you absorbed not just your position, but how other people um, coach their positions, and how coordinators and how they worked, and how I was able to support the coordinators and eventually the head coach.
Yeah, I think the communication piece, like you said, is so crucial. And, I'm a teacher outside of coaching, so I always joke that I'm really just doing that to practice coaching better, because really good teaching is good coaching, and good coaching is good teaching. And I think there's so much, and I knew when I was a player, you oftentimes you can see the mistakes yourself, but it's finding a way for that coach to communicate to you, hey, this is what you did before you made the mistake. Like, I know I'm not supposed to lean or take that long of a step, but it's that ability to recognize and communicate those mistakes that are leading to, maybe some of the outcomes that you don't want. I think that's certainly a huge part of, being a positional coach. In terms of, becoming a head coach, what's your advice to younger coaches that are, hopefully, whether it's at their high school in their summer league program, or maybe even to a Team Canada or youth sports program? What's your kind of advice to coaches that have that aspiration?
Yeah, I think, sometimes you get lucky. I always just say the reason I'm a head coach is I was at St. Mary's. Blake Nill was at St. Mary's. And kind of out of the blue, Blake decides to take an opportunity to go to Calgary, and the job opened. And, it was like, it wasn't something I necessarily was looking to do, or had my mind set, oh, I better be, or I really need to be a head coach at this point. And then from there, it's sometimes it's scary when you're in that position, because the big thing that someone had gave me advice, but they gave that advice to me after I became a head coach, was, do you love coaching? And I go, yeah, I love coaching. Then don't be a head coach, because you lose all of the sort of daily preparation and excitement of that. Sometimes you're dealing with a whole lot of a bunch of other things than just the football on the field. So, just as I'd say, make sure that you are ready to tackle, knowing that you're going to be dealing with, 90 plus guys. How are you going to handle every situation that comes into play? Because to me, that's what head coaching is. How you're going to develop, how you're going to grow your program. There's so many things. You're dealing with your alumni. You're dealing with, the community, academics. There's so many things that come into play. So, it sometimes looks good. Oh, wow, that guy gets his name mentioned more than I do. But, for the most part, it's the guys on the ground doing the work. Sometimes they're the guys you're most envious.
Yeah, I've been a head coach. I've been fortunate to be a head coach for the Cambridge Lions now for 4 years, and you definitely see that. You go from, how are we going to beat this protection, or how are we going to run this, into this front, to hey, are you going to be the one taking attendance on the bus? And then when we get there, we don't have the change room yet, and so there's so many great things that go along with being a head coach, like you being able to have a relationship with all the guys on the team. That's something I've loved coaching the high school kids is, I get to be around guys, whether they play free safety or left guard. I get the chance to interact with everybody. But it definitely was a bit of a shock, how different football practice is. Like, I'm looking around and everyone's doing indie, and I got to remind myself sometimes, like, get out of the way. Like, you don't need to do anything right now. Like, go solve a problem that's not being solved, not, go focus on what the O-line's doing or whatever. So I think that's definitely some great advice. And that kind of leads me to my next question. And, certainly there's football at all levels, and practice is different, whether you're coaching a Pee-wee team or a youth sports team. In general, like for whether it's high school coaches or summer league coaches, so guys who are coaching, relatively serious level of football, how do you try and structure practice? Obviously, you can get into the nitty-gritty of this many minutes here versus that many minutes there. But like in general, how do you kind of structure your practice and to try and help everyone be successful?
Yeah. Well, I think, I guess the biggest thing that you always look for is progression. your practice should flow. And what I mean by that is, normally you come out, your guys are not necessarily warmed up completely. You're probably doing some sort of walkthrough or insertion period. They get together, they warm up. And normally after that, we like to do a competitive period, maybe a no huddle or something, as much as anything for energy. Just bringing that energy into the practice. Then you're usually rolling right into special teams, which is good because usually your guys are a bit tired, and you want them to be able to have to transition from O&D into the special teams. And then it's kind of it kind of reverts back a little bit, and then you start to roll into your indie time. You start doing your teaching skills, and then it slowly starts to build up again. You might do your inside run or one-on-ones and skelly, and then you finish with team periods and some competitive time.
Yeah, that piece about having that competitive period early in practice, that's something that we've done at Laurier as well. And I can't remember which year we went to it. It was pretty early on with Coach Falls. I don't think it was right away, but it might have been. But we hadn't done that previously, and the change in energy was almost like air getting blown into practice. Like it was everyone's up, everyone's going. Warm up takes on a whole new meaning because immediately following warm up, hey, we're going to be on the 25-yard line going out, with 3 minutes on the clock or whatever it is. And that's something that I've tried to do with my summer teams as well, because I just think it creates so much energy, and people often can be looking, okay, we're this far away from inside run or we're this far away from one-on-ones, because it's natural, right? They look forward to the competitive stuff. And
for sure,
I think that it really gave our guys a chance to, even just to experience, hey, you're going to go warm up and you're going to play, which is ultimately what we have to do come game day too, right? So that's a great point, and something that it had never been when I was in high school. I never did that. I don't think I did that my first year at Laurier, but I really saw a difference and had my eyes open to that. And I've talked to a lot of other people that see it as an important part of what they do as well.
And I'd just like to add a piece to this. Sometimes one of the challenges of and again, this is at every level, is the individual skill compared to the system. And I just like to mention that, because this really becomes an issue with Team Canada. Because normally you're sitting at about 45 or less, 40 to 45 guys, depending, and you've got to be able to install your offense, your defense, and your special teams in a short amount of time. How much indie, how much contact, how much can you do? And it really, to me, the biggest thing is keeping the tempo high. I'm a big believer in that. I think if the tempo's high, things like conditioning and all of those other things don't necessarily come into play. And your athletes learn to play with a little bit more stress on them. They're a little bit more tired. And when they roll into the game actually feels easier. And, I think that's a piece that needs to always get taken care of.
Yeah, I think it's something that a lot of people talk about, we're going to jog from drill to drill or whatever. But, when I see really good coaches and coaches that I want to emulate myself, like even their drill work, like guys aren't standing in line, you're finding ways to keep people involved. And you're getting the most out of that time, and again, it's interesting to be able to coach at the summer league level and at the university level. Like sometimes we'll have our varsity team has half the field, our JVs have the other half, and there's 60 kids on each team. So there's your 120 kids, and then there's 10 coaches on each team. So you got 140, people, and the finding room and space to make all those things a reality. It's caused me honestly to find different ways to do things. Whereas at university you have a little more space and still got a lot of guys in the field, but the organization around it is all a lot simpler. And reliably, hey, like we're going to have this much space to use and that. So it's definitely a huge point there. I think that's really valuable. Kind of my last question, and I think this is something that all head coaches, and it's really, I think, come to the forefront. Like the last couple of years, I think I've heard the term culture used more than I ever have in my whole life. And I'm a big fan personally of a lot of the Urban Meyer stuff. and PJ Flack has some really cool stuff out there too. Just different ways people communicate what they want their culture to be and how they want their players to act and play and operate within their organization. I know it's a big topic, but what advice do you have for coaches on trying to create a strong culture, and maybe what's like one example of how you try and create that either with the national team or with Carleton?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's slight changes between the national team and Carleton only because of the amount of time. I'll start with Carleton, then I'll whip back to the national team. With us, it came down to what's important. What are we trying to get our players to accomplish at the end of it? And everybody has different things. We talk about our pillars. We talk about our guiding principles, and I mentioned them earlier: trust and communication. They set the foundation for our program. And then what are the things that are going to support that? And then what are our ultimate goals? And eventually we want graduating players, we want to develop good citizens, and we want hopefully win some games. That's that's part of our job along the way. And I think if we can get the players to buy into that, your culture naturally takes care of itself. And it naturally takes care of itself when you find the people in your program that are leaders. Like, you're going to naturally have leaders. And if you get those guys on your side, you won't have cliques in your locker room. The guys will be very much understanding of what we're doing. And I keep going back to communication, but to me, that's key. Your players need to know that they trust you, and what you say is what you actually mean. You're not dancing around topics, or you say something to player A and something different to player B. And it also has to resonate right through your coaching staff. It can't just come from the head coach. Everybody has to buy into what you're selling. For such a long answer, but the Team Canada one, that's different, because really you've got 2 weeks. And this past year in 2018 in Mexico, we took the guys on a excursion. We went to the Sun and Moon Temple just outside of Mexico City. And it was amazing to see how tight the group got. They're on the bus together to travel there. They hang out together. We get some pictures together. They start to, feel comfortable within themselves. And then it's all about why you're here, what you're representing. You're representing yourselves. You're representing your family, your programs. And most importantly, you're wearing the maple leaf on your chest, and wear that proudly. And, now let's all work towards the common goal of being a world champion.
Yeah, I think that it's certainly a different dynamic. And I think about that too. My dad's a longtime high school coach, and, your season in high school sometimes can be so short, right? And then they go on to the hockey coach or basketball coach or whatever else they're doing, right? And then you get them again in August, and you got kind of, maybe the last week of August, September, and October, and then you're in, your season might be over, your playoffs or whatever. So I'm always interested in how can you kind of create that culture you want amongst your team in a short period of time. And I think that obviously being in a whole totally different country is certainly a bonding experience.
Sure.
But when you can kind of create that, being on the national team, I would assume, there's that culture of, hey, like, it's us versus everybody else. And that naturally brings everybody together. One of the things at my high school, we had a tradition of winning, and then we hadn't won for 2 or 3 years when we kind of got there. So when we were on our way to, halfway through our career, kind of, we had a pretty good roster, and we just kind of felt, hey, like, everyone's enjoyed beating us for a while. Like, now it's us versus the world. It's kind of the same,
Yep.
mentality, right? A totally different setting. But, I think that when you have that limited time, it's so hard. And that's one of the mistakes that I made early on as a young head coach in Cambridge, is I focused, back to the communication piece, is I focused on my communication on the players. So,
Right.
I would constantly be talking to the players about our culture, what I wanted us to be doing. And I didn't do a good enough job of coaching the coaches, and it's not that, their messages are flying in the face of what you're saying. No one's saying, hey, be a bad teammate. Hey, don't be accountable. But if they're not using the same language you're using, it's just inefficient, right? So, I might say be accountable, and somebody else would say, hey, you got to be a good teammate, right? And then all of a sudden, that gets lost in translation, right?
For sure.
And so that was a huge lesson that I learned on that front. So when you talk about, communication and how important that is, and coming through, kind of back to the positional coach thing we talked about at the start, coming back through your staff, I think that's so critical. So, taking a look now, and we've talked kind of more of the big picture program development coaching stuff. I know you got some film to show us on Jet Sweep from that 2018 team. So we'll hop right into that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the interesting thing about these tournaments, and this being the International Bowl, and we're playing at AT&T here, and it's, what can our team do against a team that we haven't scouted? So what I'm going to show you is some great stuff, and then maybe not so great stuff, depending on things that you assume that defenses were going to do to you, and things that they didn't do to you that you would have thought of. And again, one of the things that I'd like to mention right off the bat is, why we ran this. It's because of the personnel we had. We had some pretty darn good players on this team. And those guys were able to set the tone for what we wanted to do. And, the American team was pretty stacked, and probably a bunch of these guys have gone on to, Division I teams and whatever. But, we were able to go out and battle and beat them. So just preference that. And like I say, I apologize for the film, but we'll get a definite idea of kind of what we're looking for. So right off the bat, a couple things to look at is they're playing with a 2 high shell, which you see a lot of in the American game. And to be honest with you, we're starting to see a lot more of this in the Canadian game. And is the
Absolutely.
2 shell turning into cover 4? Is it turning into cover? Our teams rotating because of strengths and weaknesses and so on. So one of the reasons I really like this play is that it forces the defense to either A, get out of their sound setup that they're in, or it forces them to have to move when they're not prepared to. So right off the bat, the first thing we're going to see is our tackle is going to do a really good job of helping seal the end, and our tailback helps chip with him. Because they're playing a 2 high shell, the number 2 receiver to the field now is going to be, he's responsible for cracking the first linebacker that shows. So when we watch it from here, timing is pretty good here. So right off the bat, you can see, we're taking outside zone steps, and 67 does a great job of hooking. 24 is now, and again, it's a little different in the Canadian game because 24 would have motioned out there a little bit earlier, and we would have probably gotten the edge a little quicker. You can see our slot at number 2 starting to come down and pick them up. We do a good job of sealing. You see our tailback helps out on our tackle. We get the edge. Unfortunately, we missed the block by the receiver on the Sam linebacker, but in turn we turn the corner and get first down gain. Just one of the things that we look for is how do teams rotate to this, and what you're going to notice in this instance is that the Americans don't rotate. What we get is a lot of times in this, when we get the jet motion going, you're going to get a spin or rotation from the defense. They're going to try to bring the free safety down. They're going to try to maybe track it. But because of this, we made that assumption, and you'll see in a couple plays that we tried to throw play action off of this look, and free safety had other ideas.
Yeah, I love getting anytime, to me it's kind of like quarterback run. Like if you can get the running back involved and motion a guy in or use the quarterback in the run game, it's so tough on defenses because the gaps are changing. It's a 2-gap run out of a 1-back set.
Exactly.
And that's obviously, you're making the defense adjust as the play is going. And like you mentioned with the motion rules in Canada, that back has an even easier job. He can be much closer to the line of scrimmage when the ball's snapped.
Definitely. And one of the things that's interesting is the yard versus the non-yard. And people are like, well, sometimes the yard can be an advantage. But what happens sometimes in the American game is because the tackle is right on the end, he can actually get his hands on him much faster, where the end can, if the tackle takes an outside zone step, that defensive end can now, in our game, start to shoot to the outside. And there's, like in everything, there's always pluses and minuses. This is it. Again, we go this is exactly what you're talking about with your quarterback run. So now we're trying to get stretched by the tailback. You can see the will linebacker now expanding. They're still in a 2 shell. We end up going with a QB draw. We fake the jet and go quarterback draw. As you can see in the middle there that we're folding and coming up on the MAC backer, and our tackle is now going to try to seal on the I don't think you can see who that is, but we're trying to seal down. And again, a pretty darn good play to get 6 yards. But it also puts some thoughts in their head that we're not just going to run jet sweep, but the quarterback has an opportunity to get involved in that run. And also, when we go to the next one, which is just coming up here.
Yeah, that element of, being able to run the ball, obviously with the jet sweep man, but now, they've got to be able to defend multiple different looks. That's tough on the defense, and something that you're already built in. If you already have, quarterback draw in your toolkit and you already have the jet sweep, it's not like you're adding too much to kind of create another play for yourself there.
And I should add to this element, when people say, oh, I want to run jet or whatever, sometimes they always look at, who's my best receiver, I want to get him the ball in space. But to me, the best guys that run this are your punt returners. Who are the guys that are used to making cuts in space, can cut back? Because some of these times that you'll see, it doesn't become an outside run play. Sometimes the end does push up the field, and the jet guy has to come back inside, and then you go from there. This is just a variation where we're trying to get. You can see they're tracking now. They're in a cover 1 look. They're tracking, and then we're going to run a counter play off of that. Timing was a little bit shady, and because of that, good on the back for getting a little bit of a positive gain on that. But the timing of this, and again, this is the downside of trying to put a play like this in 5 days before a game. And again, would we have run this? Knowing what we know of what they played on defense after the game when we watched the film, probably not. We might have had a better chance of just running the jet on that.
It shows you how simple it is, though, to get. You have the jet concept, but now in the first, all those are in the first half. There, you have 3 different looks. You've run off it. 3 different guys carry the football.
Exactly, and here we go again. Now this is a different guy running it. Pretty good timing, and you can see. And this is the key. We call this an alley block, where the guys are trying to now cut off to the backside. And when I talk about the punt return guys, this is sometimes what happens. You get that cutback on the backside of that. We're doing a pretty good job here of fronting some guys. Nice job by our tailback to just really blow through and allowed our tackle to take over that block. And sure enough, we get around the edge. And again, this is a 53-yard wide field as opposed to a much larger field. Now we go with the fly action, and we release the back. So there goes the action. And now instead of the back being to the front side of the play, the back goes to the weak side. We try to catch them. And again, scouting out a team, if a team's not going to play rotational defense, you probably wouldn't do this. But in this game, we're thinking, hey, if we catch them, our back could be alone if the Mac and the will flow with the play.
Absolutely.
I'm just going to show one more. It's where we end up throwing a pick off it, but you can see why this could have been such a successful play. Ooh. And so right off the bat, we get in this set, and we're running to the field. We're running double post, and you can see the free safety is cheated down a little bit. So right off the bat, our quarterback's probably going, "Hey, this is great. I got an opportunity to make that throw." What ends up happening is they give us a cover 3 look, and no real respect to the fly motion. We run a jet off of that. We run double post, kind of has them, but that's a hell of a play by a free safety, or we score on that. So, it's not just running the jet. It's what you're going to do with the jet, depending on what the defense is going to do to you. Are they going to chase? Are they going to track? Some teams will, as soon as that guy goes and runs the jet motion, they'll bring the half or whoever from the weak side and try to prevent anything coming back. Sometimes you can run counter off of that action. There's lots of things. It's one of my favorite plays. I think there's just a ton of things you can do with it, and it puts a lot of stress on the defense.
Yeah, I think your point about the punt return is so true. And I got to see, we had Curly Gittens running that for 3 or 4 years, and
he was all right.
Yeah, he was all right. I don't think I've seen a better punt returner. Really, I mean, he's one of the best players I've been around, one of the nicest kids too. But that ability, and I was always impressed. Like, it's one of those plays where I think some people shy away from it because they're worried about, hey, it's behind the line of scrimmage for a long time, and you're giving up ground and whatever. But when you have a guy that treats it almost like a punt return, we had some really good plays where you get your outside foot in the ground and you just go vertical, and it ends up being, maybe it's a 6-7 yard play like some of the ones you've shown. But, when the defense is flowing like that, sometimes the seams don't have to be huge, especially if you have a guy that, feels comfortable kind of navigating that space. And, certainly for us, Curly was as good example as you could find for that. But I've seen even other guys, like I know Guelph used to run it with Newer Stieg a lot, who's obviously a great punt returner. And it's one of those plays where you have whatever offense you run, like whether you're, power, inside zone, counter, spread, 2-back, like whatever it is, you can work this kind of into your system and find a way to help, like you're saying, manipulate defenses and create some looks off that. So,
well, one of the reasons that I did this at St. Mary's is we had a guy named Jameek Taylor, and Jameek was one of the best punt returners. When you look at the overall stats of in U Sport, he's in the top 5 all time. And, we wanted to get the ball in his hands as many times as we could. And it was like, okay, he wasn't going to be a true tailback, but we could hand him the ball 3 or 4 times. He could return punts. In 1 year in the league, he averaged almost 200 yards of offense a game, including special teams. So, it's also about your personnel. Corey Philpott, I'd be remiss if I didn't give him, all the credit on this. Like, his 2 boys, Jalen and Tyson, were part of this, and he was the OC, and he knew those guys as well as anybody. And that's one of the reasons. I mean, for us, it just married. He said, "I want to run this," and I was like, "You better run this." Like, it worked out great. And he did a really good job of calling it, knowing when to call it, and we had some good success out of it. And like I said, beating this team, I think, was setting us up for our world championship in Mexico.
Yeah, it's certainly, the ability to take, one play and then add it to, a number of, or concept really, and add it to a number of different things you do, like you showed us here. I think that's something that all coaches can kind of learn from. So really appreciate your time today, Coach. And